what are the, so for the benefit of recording, I'll just repeat it. So today we will go ahead and continue taking a look at what are the message types that we have, and what are the segments that are involved in each message type. So we'll start with ADT-A04 and take a look at all the segments that are involved in HL7 ADT-A04 message. And we'll also explore at segment level and understand what are the important fields. We don't need to cover all the fields because every segment has a lot of fields in it. So we will touch base on the important fields and understand what that specific field is used for wherever an explanation is needed. Few are self-explanatory. We'll just understand by reading those field descriptions, but few may not. And a few will have some sort of functional background or functional scenario on why that is being used or how that is being used. So wherever such a requirement is applicable, I'll go ahead and explain them with possible real-time scenarios. Okay, so let's get started with ADT-A04. ADT-A04, A08, A28, or A31, these four event types. In fact, any ADT-A04 will follow some sort of basic structure. Okay, as you can see on the screen, we have these segments involved in an ADT message. We'll have MSH, we'll have EVN, PID, PV1, GT1, and IN1. All of these are acronyms again. As you can see, the name itself will tell us, or the acronym itself will explain what kind of data that particular segment can have. So message segment header is nothing but kind of our index in a textbook. And then you have EVN, which represents an event. PID is patient identification segment. PV1 is patient visit segment. GT1 is guarantor, and IN1 is insurance. So each segment has its own set of data elements. Now, here we might get a question, is it a common structure that every ADT message will have MSH, EVN, PID, P1, GT1, IN1? The approach that we are going to have towards each message type is to look at what are the most common segments that may be part of each message type. Not only just for ADT, we are going to have the same approach for rest of the message types as well. Okay. But in order to determine what is the final structure of any message type, we have a concept called as profiling, which we are going to take a look in the later part of the training to understand how can you structure your HL7 message. So that is done with the help of profiling. So we'll talk about profiling in the later parts of the session. For now, as we need to understand that this is a generic structure any ADT message can have. Okay. At times you may see an ADT message only with MSH, EV, and PID, or only with MSH and PID. You may not find rest of the segments that you're seeing here. At times you may see few more additional segments from what is being displayed here. You may have AL1 being added, or DG1 or PR1 being added to this particular list. So all of those things purely depends on the event that we are dealing with, and also depends on the profile structure of that certain event. So we will explore that down the line and understand how profiling can be done and what is the process, what are the rules around profiling. Okay, so for now, as I said, we'll go with the generic structure of any message type. 308 or 828 or 831 message will have these segments in common. So what we are going to do is, as we now know that this is the structure that an ADT message may have, we will take a look at each segment and explore what are the fields present in each segment. So let's start with a message segment, which is message segment header. So as the name itself suggests, it is a header segment. So it will include data elements which will let us know who is sending the message, from which system the message got generated, or from which facility the message got generated, uh, who or which application is going to receive the data, and which facility that application belongs to, and when the message got generated, what is the name of that particular message. So all of these details are present in the message segment header segment. So you can compare it, or you can think of it like a like index in a textbook. Index will let us know what is the content of that particular book, right? Chapter 1 has so and so information, chapter 2 has so and so information, and so on. A very brief info about what is present in that particular book, or yeah, in that particular book, right? Very similarly, a message will let us know what is the content of that message, who is sending, who is receiving, and all of this information. So let's take a look at fields and understand where these data elements are being transacted. So a message one is always a field separator. So we'll talk about that field separator in a bit. First, let us try to understand what is this table. So all the HL7 messages and their structure is expressed in the form of this, in the form of the table that you're seeing here. Okay, so I pull out this data from a website called Caristics. You can also go ahead and use that particular website. It's very helpful in real-time implementations. So this website has everything divided version-wise. These are direct specifications uh, from HL7 organization. So they took the specification documents from HL7 organization, and they have added it to the website. So let me paste this in the chat. Whoever wants to go ahead and take a look at it can grab it. So here in trigger events, I will go to ADTA04, and there I have all the message structure. So when you look at a message segment has this particular display format. This is what I pulled up. Okay. Yeah, but added few things or modifications on what I feel to be important. So let's understand what is this table structure, what it is going to tell us, and then we will take a look at each field one by one. So first column will tell us uh, what is the field or field position or sequence number. Okay, as you can see, all the fields are accounted for here. In a message segment, we have 25 fields altogether, right? So each field will have other columns. Length will tell us, is there a length constraint associated with that particular field? Now, the tricky part here is if it is zero, it means that uh, it doesn't mean that you cannot send anything. It means that there is no limitation on that particular field. If you see a number, specific number there, then you can understand that there is a constraint that you cannot go ahead and send beyond so many number of characters that is displayed in the length section. Then you have DT, which is nothing but data types. In yesterday's session, I have told you that data types will define what is the structure of any database. Sorry, what is the structure of any field, right? Can you guys be on mute, whoever is that? All right. So uh, MSH1, so the data types are nothing but they will define what is the structure of that particular field. So we have a couple of sessions about data types once we complete the message structures. So that's when we will explore more on what is data type. So for uh, to continue with the message structure, we will leave out this column for now. Then you have optionality. Optionality is nothing but cardinality. This will tell us whether a certain field is required, optional, or you may have other expressions as well. So let's see what all things are possible. So you will see something called as R, which means it is a required field. So HL7 has made it mandatory for that field to be there, data to be there in that certain field in order to be sent in the HL7 message. Then you have O, which is nothing but optional, which means HL7 has marked this as optional. So there is no need for us to go ahead and send it for sure. Next, you have, we are not saying other expressions here. We'll come across them down the line, as in when we encounter an example, I'll explain what they are. But let's see what all the other possible values we may have. Another one is C, which is nothing but conditionally required, which means uh, it may be required based on certain conditions. And this condition may be based on another field within that certain HL7 message, or it may be a functional scenario where the functional requirement demands the data to be sent for sure. So such kind of situations will have conditionally required. So segments are already predefined as conditionally required wherever it is applicable. So as and when we go through the HL7 message, we'll definitely come across few examples. We'll take a look at that. Next, you have something called as W, which is withdrawn. Withdrawn indicates that this particular field is withdrawn, but is still there for supporting at least for next two versions. Okay, let's say I'm in version 2.5 and certain field is being marked as withdrawn. So it will be there in 2.6, 2.7. At least it will be there for the next two versions. And from 2.8, it will be marked as deprecated. Okay, so these are the things that you will see. Another one is um, you have something called as P, which is backward compatibility. Okay, so basically it will be marked as backward compatibility first, so that for the next two versions, at least two versions, this will be retained. And after two versions, it will be marked as withdrawn, which means it is not being used anymore, or it is not being supported, or you shouldn't use it anymore in the higher versions. Okay, so backward compatibility is something that will be marked for current version and next two versions. Okay, so these are the expressions that you will see in this particular field where we have something called as optionality. Uh, Next, we have repeatability. So certain fields can be repeatable. So we did not look at an example yesterday when we were talking about the message structure. We did take a look at a message segment. Sorry, we did take a look about PID segment, and we did see field level and component level only. But we did not talk about repetition, subcomponents, and all. We will explore repetition values more when we get to the PID segment. But to brief, a data element within that field can be repeatable, and whether that certain field can be repeatable or not is expressed in the repeatability column. Okay, more on it in the upcoming sessions. We'll take a look at that. Next, we have table. So a few HL7 defined fields will have a table associated with it, which will have list of values that may be sent in that particular field. Okay, a good example is if you look at PID segment, we have something called as gender, right? It has a table of 1. So if you look at this table has few values, right? So this field may contain any one of these values. Okay, again, there are constraints, whether it's a user defined table, HL7 defined table, and all. So as and when we come across a certain field, wherever it is needed, we'll open the table and take a look at it. But the idea is HL7 has associated few table and the data that has to be sent in that certain field. So wherever that rule is applicable, you will see a table definition there. Okay, and this table may be empty or you may have data depending on the type of the table that is associated with that particular field. Okay, Next, we have name. So name is nothing but description of that field, which will give us clear information on what this field is used for. Okay. So in this way, we have various segments, various fields, and this table structure is really helpful. Whenever you look at any specification document of any vendor or any implementation, you will see pretty much uh, similar notation of tables with providing very similar information. You may have some additional columns to give even more better explanation about each field, what is the structure they are expecting and all. We call them as implementation guides. So when we talk about profiling and all, we'll talk about implementation guides too. Okay, so now let us continue taking a look at the fields, individual fields and field descriptions. So this is an HL7 message that we can make use of. Right. So in yesterday's and the day before yesterday's session, when we were talking about HL7 field segment structure, I told you that segments will have many fields and each field is held between two pipes, right? So whatever is there between two pipes is called as field, and each field has a sequence number associated with it. We call it as field positioning. So this is position number one, this is position number two, three, four, and five, and so on, right? But if this rule applies everywhere, the end throughout the entire HL7 message, this rule is applicable except at one location. Okay. Only exception is MSH1. So when you look at an MSH segment, what could be field number one? So apparently, from what we understood so far, that whatever is held between two pipes is called as a field. We'll consider that this is field number one, this is field number two, this is field number three, because this is what is held between two pipes. So that's what we will consider. But there is small exception here, uh, out of the box uh, situation or out of the box setup, you can say, where MSH segment is the only segment where field number one is the pipe itself. Okay, the field separator itself is called as field number one, and then followed by what is the regular expression of it. I mean, this is field number two, this is field number three, field number four, five, and so on. The whatever is held between two pipes in MSH segment as field number one, we call the pipe itself as field number one, and then you have subsequent fields two, three, four, five, six, and so on. Okay, just keep that in mind, as that is an exception. Next, MSH2 has encoding characters. Encoding characters are nothing but the punctuation marks for it writing and reading HL7 message. So these are called as delimiters, encoding characters, uh, control characters. So you may call it any one of these with any one of these three names. So these are present in a message field number two, so that someone who is reading that HL7 message and understands that we are using so and so elements to break down the entire HL7 message or to construct the entire HL7 message. Okay. Next, we have four important fields: MSH3, 4, 5, and 6. So MSH3, 4, 5, 6 represent basically uh, who is sending the data and who is receiving. Now, whenever you talk about any HL7 message, apparently it is a message or it is some data that is generated and has to be transacted between two different systems. If there is no scope of data transaction, or if there is no scope for the data to be sent from one system to another, then there is no need of HL7 message at all, right? So whenever you're talking about any HL7 message, you're talking about a transaction that is happening between two systems, system A and system B, for example. Or in our workflow scenarios, we can consider a message between PM system and EHR system. PM, where the patient is getting registered. As soon as patient gets registered, we have to send out ADT message to EHR, right? So here two systems are involved, PM system and EHR system. So we have a sending application and a receiving application. Not only that, these applications may be present in the same facility, or these may be present in a different facility. Facility in the sense the geographical location of that particular hospital, clinic, or wellness center, whatever it is, where the patient's data is being stored. Okay, so that which facility is sending it, which facility is receiving it. So that information is present in MSS 3, 4, 5, and 6. 3 and 4 are for sending or to capture sending application information. 5 and 6 are used for receiving application information. Next, you have MSH7, which is nothing but the date and time of the message. Date and time is nothing but the current generated date and time uh, when exactly that particular HL7 message is being constructed or created using any any integration engine, not just Mirth. We may have other integration engines like Rhapsody and all. We'll talk more about integration engines down the line, but it is a tool used to go ahead and generate an HL7 message. Next, you have MSH9. MSH9 is message type. So I want to add a quick point here. Whatever is highlighted in green are important fields from my experience so far, from what I have seen in past many years. So these data elements, uh, if you memorize them, that will be very good, uh, which will help us to go ahead and refer to certain field immediately during the process of development or implementation, or when you're on call specifically. While implementing an HL7 project, you may have to get on a call a lot, at least initially, to understand the specification documents. At that point, we may discussing, someone may tell you what, this is what I'm sending in PID 8. So we should be aware what PID 8 is, right? So I have highlighted the most common segment fields that we may usually talk about during the calls. Okay, so as part of our training, we are going to go through only those highlighted fields. Now we won't touch or we won't go through rest of the fields. So let's continue. So message 9 is nothing but the message type. This is the name of the message, which message you are dealing with. So message 9 will give you that info. Next, message 10, which is control character. Now, when you're talking about a message, every message has to have a unique ID so that it will help you to track that particular message from hundreds and thousands of messages that you have, right? When you are making a transaction, or basically when you are going to a hospital or clinic, you may have hundreds of patients or thousands of other data transactions that might be happening in terms of HL7. So how do you track one specific message? So that is by looking at this message control ID. So message control ID is a unique ID for each and every message for one interface. Okay. Then you have a message 11, which is nothing but the processing ID. Processing ID will tell us whether a message is a development message or a testing message or a production message. Okay, you have three values that you may see, you encounter whenever you look at processing ID. One is P, which indicates that it's a production message. Then you will have T, which indicates test message. Then you have D, which indicates development message. Okay, these are important. Let's say you are testing and by mistake you are sending some development or test data to production. production will immediately reject that message. It will not process it because it received D or T in the HL7 message field. Okay, so that way it will be helpful for us to go ahead and interpret and see what kind of message we are dealing with. All right, let's see. We have a question. Does length is equal to 0 mean no character limitation? Yes, Bhavana, that's right. So if you have 0, then it means we don't have any limitations on length. Next, we have a message 12, which is version ID, self-explanatory. Any HL7 message that you're dealing with will have this, may have this particular field indicating what version of HL7 message that is. Okay, it may be 2.3, 2.5, 2.7, or 2.8, anything. Next, you have a message 15 and 16. So these two are very, very important fields, but they are optional again. There is no mandatory, it's not mandatory that acknowledgements has to be followed. It is a recommendation that acknowledgements has to be followed. Let's understand what acknowledgements are and what are the values that we may send in these two fields. Okay. First of all, what is an acknowledgement? Can anyone unmute yourself and give a just, I mean, tell your understanding of what is acknowledgement?
It's like acknowledging that we have received the message.
Right, right, exactly. So, uh, basically, whenever you go to any grocery store, right, you pay the fee, sorry, you pay the amount, and after paying, you get the counterfoil or a receipt, which indicates or which acts as a proof of purchase, right? That you have purchased so and so thing. So that is called acknowledging that you have paid the amount for the goods. In the same way, we are talking about a message, HL7 message, being transacted between two different systems. How will the sending system know that the message has been sent or delivered successfully to the destination? Right? So that is something that has to be communicated back to the source system or the sending system that message made it successfully to the destination. So for this purpose, we have this concept called acknowledgements. Whenever you're sending data from PM system to EHR, EHR to lab, or lab to PM system, whatever the flow is, apparently at the end of the day, one message is going to transact between two different systems. So sending system will expect an acknowledgement to process the messages further. Okay. So acknowledgements are of two kinds. One is accept level acknowledgement and the other one is application level acknowledgement. Accept level acknowledgement has its own rules why it is an accept level acknowledgement, and application level acknowledgement has certain conceptual reason why it is called as an application level acknowledgement. We are going to explore these two when we are looking at acknowledgement message type. So there is a separate message type for acknowledgements called ACK. So at that point, we will go ahead and explore more on what are the different types of acknowledgements that we have, accept and application. For now, we need to understand that by sending information in a message 15, you are asking the destination system whether you need an acknowledgement or not. So this is a way for the sending system to talk to destination system and say, please send me the acknowledgement, or I don't need the acknowledgement at all, something like that. Okay, let's see what are the values possibly can be sent in a message 15 or 16. And I told you that you may have at times tables associated with that particular field, right? So this is one of that example where a table is associated with some data in it. Let's take a look at that. So I clicked on that particular field table number. So table 155 is for having application, oh, sorry, accept and application acknowledgement codes. So here you have certain values. I want to draw your attention to one key sentence here, which where it says HL7 standard tables, right? So that indicates that there are two types of tables basically. One is HL7 standard table, other one is user defined table. So if we come across any table that is defined as HL7 standard table, then you have to go ahead and use the fields or values that are expressed by that particular table itself, which means you do not have leverage to send whatever you want to send if a table is an HL7 defined table or HL7 standard table. You have to just go ahead and see what are the values that are possible and use them. Okay. So in our current scenario, we're talking about acknowledgement. And this particular field for acknowledgement will help us to go ahead and um, tell the destination system whether I need an acknowledgement or not. So if it is always, then the destination system will go ahead and send acknowledgements always. If it is ER, then destination system will go ahead and generate a error. And if you're sending any, it means that I don't need, or I wouldn't need your acknowledgement at all. And then finally you have SU, which means send me an acknowledgement only in terms of successful messages. Okay, so these are the four codes that we may send across in the HL7 field. So with that, we complete the message segment. We'll jump into PID segment. Before that, let's take the questions that we have in the chat. Why MSH 4, 5, 6, and 7 are optional? Good question, Willis. So HL7 while defining the specification, the idea is to have the fields loosely packed so that you can grab it and you can make it required in your own specification. They don't want to stringently tell that you have to go ahead and use this data for sure. Wherever such rules are applicable, they have already marked the field as required, which you have to abide by. But uh, HL7 doesn't want to go ahead and have, or basically, I would say not go ahead and have a rule, but give flexibility to the user. Whoever wants to grab that particular segment and use it in their message, they want to give the flexibility. In some contexts, it might be required. In some contexts, few fields might not be required, right? So based on the context, things might change. That's the reason fields are left out as optional. And you can pick it up with the help of profiling. You can mark something that is optional as required for your particular message structure. Okay, for example, I want to go ahead and develop my message structure for ADT 828 message. I'll grab I'll grab this message segment basic structure, and I will make 3456 as required in my profile. Okay, so I am creating a custom structure of it. So this all of these things will come as part of profiling. But to give you an idea, the specification, the base specification itself is loosely packed. There is no stringent rule that uh, wherever there is scope of leaving fields as optional, they have given that as optional. But wherever fields are definitely required, they have marked them as required, and you have to abide by that rule. Okay, does it answer your question, Willis?
Yes, thank you.
Right. So someone is asking whether, yeah, could you please repeat the backward compatibility and withdrawn? Okay, yeah, sure. So backward compatibility, let's say in version 2.5, let's take an example. Okay, in 2.5, PID 2, which is used for sending patient ID, this is an optional field. Okay, in 2.6, PID 2 patient ID is marked as B. Same in 2.7, it will be marked as B. And then finally, with 2.8, it will be marked as withdrawn. So certain field will be withdrawn based on many reasons. For example, they are not sufficiently describing, or they are not sufficiently holding the data that needs to be held, and HL7 wants to add a new field altogether. So when such things happen, they will not go ahead and modify the existing field, but add a new field. Okay, new field at the end of the segment, which is a different story again. But in case if they plan to go ahead and not use that particular field, first they will mark it as backward compatible. Okay, as we can see in 2.5, it was optional, which means users have the flexibility to go ahead and use it. But in 2.6 and 7, by indicating that it's a backward compatible field, HL7 is telling you that this particular field will be deprecated in future versions. Okay, so this backward compatibility status will be there in at least two versions from where it has been started to be marked as backward compatible. So if we have marked something as backward compatible in 2.6, then you will have it in 2.6 and the next version 2.7. So after two versions, in the next version, which is 2.8, they will mark it as withdrawn, which means from 2.8, you cannot go ahead and use that particular field. Okay, in 2. If you're implementing 2.7 or 2.6, you can still go ahead and use it because that's optional there still. Okay, I mean, basically backward compatible, not a required or an optional field. If you want to use it, you can use it. That has been retained for backward compatibility. Okay, does it help? Okay, great. So let us go ahead and continue looking at the segments. So the next segment that we have, any other questions from anyone? All right, I'm not hearing anything. Let's look at the next segment. So next segment is nothing but EVN segment. EVN is basically used to express your event type. So we have this information already communicated in a message 9, right? A message 9, when you look at an HL7 message, a message 9 will tell you what is the message type, right? This is message code, and this is our event type. But there is another separate segment called as event segment, which will tell us what is the event type and the date and time of the transaction. Whatever we have sent in message 7, same thing we are going to send in EVN segment as well. That's the reason in most of the actual HL7 messages, you may not see this event segment at all. Few people may send it, most of the people don't. Okay, so EVN1 is used for event type code. EVN2 is used for recorded date time. So as you can see here, we have the optionality as W, which is withdrawn, which means we are not using that particular field anymore. Now that being said, this specification that you're seeing here in all of our PDF documents, just not only today, but in the future sessions as well, these are specifications of 2.7 version of HL7. Okay, these tables, whatever I have grabbed. But our approach, as I said in the beginning, is to go ahead and look generically across version 2.x of HL7. So we are not going to have a version specific learning, but a generic learning, so that we will get an idea of whatever version of HL7 V2 we are going to use. Next, we have a PID segment. PID is patient identification segment. So this is used to have patient identification related data. So let's look at the fields one by one. In PID1 is a set ID. Set ID is nothing but a sequence number. Okay. At times, what happens is we may have to repeat that particular segment in the HL7 message. Okay, for example, patient is having allergies. Allergies are represented or are used with AL1 segment. So patient might have more than one allergy, right? So there is a possibility of having more than one allergy segment in the HL7 message. Same thing applies to PID. You may be wondering, why do we have PID segment twice? There are scenarios, or based on the workflow, we have something called as query by parameter interface. If you use that, then we will have multiple PID segments. But in generic scenario, we'll have only one because patient is just one. We are dealing with one single patient at one point of time. So PID segment PID1 is a set ID, which is nothing but sequence number. But if you have repeated PID segment, then sequence number will increase by 1 digit each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a positive number. Okay. Then you have PID 2, 3, 4. All these three are identifiers. Now you may be wondering, why do we have so many identifiers? Right? 2 and 4 are marked as withdrawn, which means they are not being used anymore in HL7 version 2.7, but it had a lot of significance in version 2.3. Okay, so let's see what these fields are. So apparently we may end up in having more than one identifier in real-time implementations. That is for sure. Okay, let's take an example. Let's say a hospital was not using a digital system, but they were managing everything through their manual work. And they may generate a unique ID for the patient. This is called as medical record number. Okay. Similarly, we may have uh, other systems within the hospital. Other branch may be assigning a different ID for different department or branch purpose, something like that. So all the identifiers are being managed manually within the hospital. Now let us suppose that that particular hospital has grabbed or planned to go digital, and they will acquire an application like any other practice management system. And once they acquire it, they will go ahead and have that particular system generate the IDs for them. But they still have the old IDs with them, right? Which they have generated manually. So we should have some sort of provision within the application to store that info, right? So every PM application or EHR application will have this provision to hold more than one patient identifier. Okay, how that is done, how that is managed is from application perspective. We don't we don't need to worry much about that for now. But all we need to understand that multiple patient identifiers are possible. Okay, after completing ADT message type, we are going to take a look at workflow scenarios and what is the importance of patient identifier and all. Uh, so we'll talk more about this aspect, multiple patients being sent to EHR at the same time, how EHR handles and all. But multiple patient identifiers being there for one single patient record is quite common and possible in the healthcare space. Okay, so if we have multiple identifiers, then we have to have data fields which can consume that data and send it in the HL7 message, right? So for that purpose, we have PID 2, 3, and 4, which will hold all the patient identifiers. But in case if you don't want certain field, you can just leave it as blank. The reason why we are seeing withdrawn for PID 2 and 4 is for the reason that uh, we are not using those fields anymore. All the patient identifiers are being sent in PID 3 itself. What do I mean by that? Now let us talk about repeatability. If you look at PID 3, we have repeatability as star, which means the data element may have repetitions. What do I mean by that? Let's look at with an example. So when we look at PID 3, you just have, this is 2, right? This is PID 2. Let's go ahead and delete everything from PID 2. Let's delete this one as well. So for the purpose of understanding, let's say patient has MRN number, medical record number as 123, and system generated patient ID as 456. So we have two identifiers here. So one is MRN number. I'll put MRN number in PID2. I'll put MRN number in PID, patient ID in PID3. Right? So we have added two patient identifiers. One is 123 MRN and patient ID individually. This is how we used to go ahead and send in terms of HL7 version 2.3. But in the later versions, we deprecated usage of 2 and 4. So whatever IDs we have should be sent in PID 3 itself. So we are talking about a common element which is called as patient identifiers. And we are understanding now that it can be marked as repeatable, which means all the IDs will be sent in one single field, which is PID3. But how are they separated from each other? They are separated from each other with the help of tilde. Tilde is an inverted S symbol, which is used to go ahead and indicate a repetition character or repetition field in the real-time implementations. Okay, so whenever you see tilde in the HL7 message, you will understand that the same field is holding uh, two data elements. So this is called as PID3. This is also called as PID3. So you can assume that there is small virtual pipe here. This is just for understanding. You will not have an existing pipe anywhere being represented. So whenever you have repetition, it means that this entire PID3 field has repetitions, and there are two repetitions right now. Each repetition has its own, each repetition is called as a full-fledged complete field, also called as PID3. Then how will you differentiate? Along with saying that this is PID3, I would also suffix it with a word called repetition number 1, repetition number 2. So now when I am talking to you, if I want to say or represent this particular message field, then I will say, hey, you know what, can you take a look at PID, uh, PID3 repetition number 2. Okay, then I will go look at the message. I'll go to PID3 and pick up, I'll go to PID3 and I will look at PID repetition number 2 and I will grab the data elements. Okay, that's how the tilde is used. Same applies for phone numbers. If you have multiple phone numbers in PID 13, you do send the phone numbers. So all the phone numbers will be sent across something like this, and we may have 3 phone numbers. So repetition character will say that the data element is repeatable and each repetition is separated with the help of tilde. Okay, how many times it can repeat? It is based on the number that is given in the repetition field. If you have 1, it means that it cannot repeat. If you have star, it means that it can repeat. Okay, so with that, I will conclude today's session. How would you determine which is MRI number and patient ID? So that's a functional aspect. Uh, these are common terms: patient ID, MRN number, or medical record number are terms used to express identifiers. There is no steadfast differentiation that MRN number or patient ID. Some may use URN, unique reference number. So these are just terms, but all of them represent identifier only to identify patient ID, basically.
Okay. Okay.
So with that, we'll conclude today's session and we'll start continue tomorrow with the rest of the fields and continue taking a look at that. And wherever we need explanation, we'll definitely discuss about the scenarios and continue taking a look at that. Once we complete ADT message type, we'll have one exercise which I will assign it to you, uh, which I want you guys to go ahead and do it so that you can construct your own HL7 message, or you understand how to construct your own HL7 message, right? So I'll open up for questions. If anyone has any questions, you can let me know.
I'm good, Dick. I don't have any question.
Yeah. Sure. All right. A quick note. I'm not hearing anything. So if you do not have any questions, we'll conclude today's session here. And if you want to continue from tomorrow, people who are enrolled, they will only be able to continue. So please reach out to Srinivas if you're planning to continue with the training. Srinivas has already posted his contact information in the chat. Reach out to him and provide your information and all. Talk to him about